ってきた。危ない。
Good evening, Prater. My story happened when I was a truck driver. I had a job where things were going really well for me. I lived with my wife and my mother. We hadn't planned on having kids yet since we were still young. My late father had helped me get that job through a contact at the company, something I will always be grateful for. My mother was also very kind and loved my wife as if she were her own daughter. Even at work I got along well with everyone. Everything seemed wonderful. But at that time, something very strange started happening. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but my instincts told me otherwise. I felt like I was being watched almost all the time, even when I just left my house to go anywhere. I don't know how to explain it properly, but that feeling never left me. Soon my suspicions grew stronger. On my night shifts, I would see black cars accompanied by motorcycles passing me on the long, dark highways. It didn't make sense for a motorcycle to be riding at such late hours. And it didn't happen just once, but several times. Something inside me told me it wasn't right. There was something unnatural about it. One night, I finally told my wife. She confessed she felt the same thing whenever she left for work. She was a teacher and said that sometimes black cars would park outside the school, making her feel watched and uncomfortable. I understood exactly what she meant and realized it wasn't a coincidence. That's when I went to the police, since we both felt in danger. That wasn't my only concern. My boss gave me a day off because apparently my truck had issues with its GPS system and needed repairs, so I couldn't make deliveries. I spent that day resting. I was truly exhausted from the crazy, inconsistent schedules they gave me. There was no organization. One week they put me on night shifts, even when I was supposed to be working mornings. It always frustrated me, but I couldn't protest. It was my job, and I had to obey orders. Later that night, my boss called me again to tell me they couldn't fix the GPS issue, and a new one would arrive in 3 days. Luckily, he said I could still work, as he had already authorized it. But they made me sign a document saying I was fully responsible for everything since they wouldn't be able to track the truck. I didn't have a problem with that and returned to work the next day. I said goodbye to my wife and my mother and went to the company. My boss was there with all the delivery documents, like always. The rest had done me good. I was starting to forget that feeling of being watched. I prayed to God that both my wife and I were wrong, and that nothing was happening. I got into the truck and drove like usual. Around 2 a.m., I began to feel a strange chill. Goosebumps spread across my skin, and I feared losing control of the truck. I slowed down, hoping I'd feel better, but that never happened. Instead, that's when the real terror began. The motorcycles and black cars appeared again, this time behind me. They sped up, overtook me, and slowed down, forcing me to stop. I thought it was a robbery. I tried to accelerate and ran my way out, but one motorcycle came up right beside my driver's door. The man pointed a gun at me and shouted for me to stop. I had no choice. They pulled me out by force, tied me up, covered my eyes, and hurled endless insults at me, ordering me to stay quiet. They shoved me into one of the cars, and we drove for a long time. I had no idea where we were when they finally pulled me out and dragged me into an abandoned ranch house. And there, my wife was also being held. Thank God they hadn't harmed her. But that was when they told us why we were there. It turned out my father had left behind a debt with organized crime, protection money, known here as cobro de piso. For those who don't know, it's a form of extortion where criminal groups demand recurring payments from anyone who owns a business or property within what they consider their territory. That debt had to be paid immediately, or else they would take our lives. They knew my mother had enough money to pay it. But even so, to make their message clear, they tortured me. They beat me with boards, waterboarded me, putting a rag over my face and pouring water so I couldn't breathe, and put me through hours of agony all night long. The only relief I had was that, for some reason, they spared my wife. They didn't hurt her physically, though she suffered the trauma of watching me endure all of it. By morning, they had already contacted my mother to coordinate the money drop. If she followed their instructions, maybe we would be released alive. Hours later, they collected the money from the place they had told her to leave it. They partially kept their word. Rather than freeing us there, they tied our hands and feet and dumped us by the roadside under the blazing midday sun. We suffered for hours until finally a passing car saw us and rescued us. They took us immediately to the hospital, where I was able to contact my mother. We were reunited, alive, and finally free from that nightmare after the debt was settled. This is not a paranormal story, but a horrific experience that is lived daily by many business owners, people who just want to make an honest living, but instead end up threatened, stripped of peace, and broken by fear. Fortunately, I survived to tell my story. Let us continue. Good evening, Prater. Up to this day, I still cannot explain what happened to me that night when I had just received a brand new truck. I don't know if it was a ghost, a demon, or simply a hallucination, but it truly left me disturbed. I keep praying to God to allow me to forget that night, but it seems I never will. At that time, I had only been working as a truck driver for 2 years. I was single, without responsibilities, and living with my older brother and sister. She was divorced, and he wasn't into serious relationships, he just liked to have fun. None of us had children, and the only one who ever spoke about wanting them one day was my sister. For me, that wasn't even a thought. I figured years would pass before settling down. At that point, life felt good. The three of us were inseparable. Even as adults, we enjoyed spending time together despite our arguments, but in the end, we were siblings. I was the only one who refused to study. University never appealed to me, and I couldn't decide on a career. So, my father helped me get a job as a truck driver, and I've been there ever since. This story began on what I thought was just an ordinary night. I was driving as usual through the darkness, sipping on a hot coffee I'd bought at a gas station. I had filled my thermos so I wouldn't need to stop again, and it kept me awake. I was relaxed, waiting for morning to arrive so I could make the delivery and head back. That's when I noticed something strange with the steering wheel. Out of nowhere, it locked up. I couldn't turn it. My coffee spilled, and I gripped the wheel with both hands, trying desperately to regain control. When I realized I couldn't, I decided to brake, but then came the second shock. The brakes didn't work. It was every driver's nightmare. The truck had multiple failures, and the collision became inevitable. The wheel pulled me slightly left, into the opposite lane, and I crashed into an oncoming truck. What saved me was that I had already released the accelerator, so my speed had dropped. That, along with God's mercy, spared me from death. Both I and the other driver were taken to the hospital, but it took hours before anyone found us. They told me at least 2 hours had passed before help arrived. Maybe I regained consciousness for brief moments, but I don't remember, and honestly, I'm glad I don't. It would have been torture. Weeks later, I was discharged and, fortunately, didn't lose my job. The company's mechanic, however, was fired. They determined the accident had been caused by his negligence, poor maintenance. When I returned, my boss told me he had a new truck waiting for me. It had been reserved for a new hire, but after what I went through, they gave it to me. I respected that man a lot, and for that reason, I didn't make a big deal about the accident. Besides, one of the executives was a good friend of my father, and they knew none of it had been my fault. My first delivery with the new truck was at night. I handled all the paperwork with my boss and headed out. I wasn't traumatized by the accident. Things like that happen once in a million. My siblings advised me to quit, but I flatly refused. Honestly, I couldn't imagine myself doing any job other than truck driving. I had survived without lasting injuries, and I saw it as God's blessing, a reason to keep going. What I didn't know was that, along with that blessing, I was about to face something paranormal. I don't know what time it was exactly, but suddenly, in the middle of the road, I heard the cry of a baby. Out of nowhere. Without any logic. I didn't understand if something was wrong with my ears or if maybe the accident had left me with brain damage. The sound was so loud that I had no choice but to stop in the middle of nowhere and check the cargo. It was absurd. The trailer was separated from the cab where I sat today. No sound, no matter how loud, could have reached me. And besides, the engine noise should have drowned it out. Still, I checked. Nothing. So I convinced myself it was my imagination and kept driving. But minutes later, the crying returned. Before I could react, I saw a woman standing in the middle of the road, just within the reach of my headlights. It was strange, but since she was blocking the way, I had to stop. She walked right up to my door, staring at me silently. I assumed she wanted me to step out. At that moment, I had two choices: stay inside and accelerate, or get out. I thought she might be a ghost, so I didn't want to offend her. I got down. She pointed to the back of the trailer while the baby's crying continued, making it clear that was what she was after, that she wanted me to open it. I froze. Somehow, I gathered the courage to walk back, unlock the doors, and let her climb inside. She did so with eerie ease, without using her hands for support, and walked through the cargo until she disappeared into the back. Seconds later, she reappeared, holding something in her arms. I assumed it was the baby, though I never actually saw it. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. If there really was a baby in there, I can't say for sure whether it was alive or something else entirely. The woman stepped back out of the truck with no effort and disappeared into the woods until her figure vanished. After that, I continued my journey. The baby's cries never returned. When I told my siblings, they didn't believe me. They thought the accident had left me with brain damage and insisted I should undergo more tests. But I ignored them. I carried on with life, holding firm in the knowledge of what I had seen that night. I'm not crazy. It really happened. Thank you for sharing my story. Let's continue. Good evening, Prater. I know many will criticize me, and I don't blame them. But at least they should put themselves in my place, in my shoes. I was going through a critical situation. My family needed me, and I wasn't going to fail them. That option simply didn't exist. I don't care if I'm judged. I know my son is safe, free from all evil, or at least, I hope so. I'll keep my identity anonymous. Many already know who I am, but not what I did, not with the detail I'm about to reveal here. This story began when my wife and I decided to move in together. It was just the two of us. I worked at a fast food restaurant back then, and fortunately the salary was just enough for us to get by. But of course, we aspired to more: our own house, a car, all of that. Those were our goals. Then, things started happening that we hadn't planned for, and everything got complicated. The same day my wife told me she was pregnant was the day I got fired from my job. It almost felt like some cruel joke from life itself, but it was real. I had no job, no way to make money, while a baby was growing in my wife's belly. At first, things were still okay. We were excited at the idea of becoming parents, of having our first child. But then the lack of money became obvious. What we ate each day barely sustained us. I went into heavy debt just to buy the basics for the baby: crib, diapers, leaving barely enough for food. We knew we couldn't go on like that. It would have been catastrophic. I prayed constantly, begging God to improve our situation, to help me find a job. But no one would hire me. No company, no small business. It was unbelievable how bad luck kept following us. Nights passed sleepless as I worried that the months were rushing by and soon my child would be born. That's when an idea began to creep into my mind, something my wife would never approve of. But desperation made me consider it, until it turned into an option. When I was a child, I was very close with my grandmother. She knew a lot about black witchcraft. She never taught me the practice, but she did teach me the theory. That's how I knew the procedure for a ritual: to sell one soul in exchange for whatever one desired. As days went by, I felt increasingly tempted, until finally, I gave in. One night, while my wife slept deeply, I went to the living room and prepared the materials for the ritual. For obvious reasons, I won't describe the step-by-step process or the items needed. That's not my intention. but I performed it. And then I stayed kneeling there for minutes, eyes closed, waiting for something to happen. That's when I heard a man's voice. He was standing in front of me, telling me to get up, that he couldn't stand to see me kneeling like a fool. I obeyed. His face was strange, hard to distinguish whether he was a man or woman, but I decided he was male, perhaps because of his deep voice. I asked if he was the devil. He didn't answer. He just looked at me, expressionless, cold. So I went straight to the point. I told him I wanted a job, good money, and stability by the time my son was born. He leaned in and whispered that he would give me all of that, but that one day he would return to collect his due. I told him I didn't care what he wanted, as long as he stayed away from my wife and my child. That under no circumstances should he take their lives. Please. He agreed. Seconds later, I fainted. I woke up at dawn to a phone call from a transportation company. That same day, I started working as a truck driver. My boss liked me, my co-workers too, and my first delivery went perfectly. At the end of the month, when I collected my first paycheck, life at home was full of happiness. My wife welcomed me with good meals, and little by little we bought more things for our baby. Months passed, and finally the day of birth came. By then, we had moved into a bigger, more comfortable apartment with a whole room ready for our child. My salary covered everything. We were very happy. But then, the moment arrived when that demonic entity began to collect its part. The first news I got was of my uncle's death. They took his life in such a violent way that I'd rather not describe it. It felt personal. I went to the funeral. It was devastating. I refused to believe it was related to what I had done, but the thought haunted me. And it didn't stop there. One night, while driving my truck, the empty road stretched ahead under a cloudy sky with no moon. The only light came from my headlights. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, I began to hear voices. Many voices, asking me why I had done it, accusing me of my uncle's death. They echoed inside my head. I had to slow down, eventually stopping completely, afraid of causing an accident. Hours passed, and eventually the voices faded. I was losing my mind. I told no one, not my wife, not anyone. I convinced myself it was just the devil's way of tormenting me, of making me believe that I had killed my own uncle. But worse was yet to come. Our little boy suddenly developed a high fever that lasted several nights. We rushed him to the emergency room, where tests revealed something we could never have prepared for. He was diagnosed with leukemia, a chronic type that would worsen over time. That devastating news had only one culprit, me. All because of money. I know telling this won't change anything. But maybe some will understand that I did it for my family, so my son would never lack anything. Later, I had to confess everything to my wife. After countless fights, she finally left, taking my son far away. I haven't seen him since. But I hope he's okay. He must be. That entity promised not to take their lives. But of course, as I should have known, he twisted the deal, leaving us with a lifetime of suffering instead. Like and subscribe if you're enjoying this. Let's continue. Many people believe that evil takes the form of spirits or demons to torment us humans. But I disagree. I can't believe that after what I lived through during the time I worked as a truck driver. And in this story I'm about to tell, I reveal that I saw it up close. At that time, I lived with my mother and my 5-year-old son. My wife had died during childbirth, and since then the three of us lived together. At first it was hard when my little boy was just a baby, but I thank my mother for always being there for me, never turning her back. I don't know what my life would have been without her. Little by little, I was able to give my son the family environment he needed, and thanks to my job as a truck driver, he never lacked anything. One day I saw on the news that a trucker had been found dead, hanging from a tree in the woods, while his truck was overturned on the opposite side of the road. The accident didn't add up, and the version given by the authorities contradicted the images they showed. It made me think a lot, and I discussed it with my co-workers that same morning. We all agreed that if the truck had crashed on one side, it was impossible for the body to be found on the other, not even by jumping. Later, the victim's family denounced the authorities for negligence, revealing that the body had multiple wounds that must have been caused by a sharp weapon. They fought for the truth, but in the end, nothing came of it. That situation worried all of us because we often drove along that same road. Nights became more unsettling after that. And that wasn't the only case. Within a month, 2 more incidents were reported, bodies found under truly terrifying conditions. Only a criminal group could have done something like that. What was really disturbing was that sometimes the trucks were intact, nothing stolen. It seemed personal, as if it were against the victims themselves. The atmosphere in the company turned grim when we were told that one of our co-workers had also been found dead on that same road. His truck had gone off the road and was destroyed. Again, controversy arose. The body was found far from the wreck, with wounds that could only have been caused by some kind of weapon. For a week we stopped doing night deliveries, but eventually it became inevitable. It wasn't convenient for the company, so we had to resume. It didn't take long before another trucker turned up dead. My family begged me to quit, saying it was too dangerous, that one day they'd get the news that I was the next victim. It would be a lie to say I didn't think about it. But I knew I'd never find another job as good as this one. I couldn't afford to quit and end up unemployed for who knew how long. So I kept going. Many of my co-workers didn't. They resigned, saying their lives were more important than a well-paid job. Eventually, I was assigned a night delivery, and my worry only grew worse. I didn't know how to react, but it was inevitable. Too many had already quit, and the company couldn't replace them overnight. I couldn't refuse. I went to the company, picked up the cargo, and hit the road. Around 1 a.m., I spotted headlights from a car parked ahead. I figured it must have broken down or had a flat tire. So I stopped beside it and called out, asking if someone needed help. That's when I heard a woman screaming for help. One of the car doors opened, and out came a man, an ordinary-looking guy you'd never suspect of committing a crime. He ignored me and dragged the woman out of the car, forcing her toward the woods that surrounded us. I jumped out of my truck and ran toward the car. I could still hear the woman crying for help, and I couldn't just abandon her. I don't know where I found the courage, but I grabbed a tool from my truck and dashed into the dark woods at full speed. My heart pounded as the silence of the forest was broken only by snapping branches and the woman's muffled cries. I crept closer, hiding behind bushes, until I saw them. The man was struggling with her, trying to silence her. With more fear than bravery, I shouted a threat to distract him. He turned toward me, fury in his eyes. I hurled the tool I was holding and hit his arm, making him release the woman for a moment. She took the chance to run toward me, though the man tried to grab her again. Without hesitation, I pulled her to me, and together we sprinted back toward my truck. We could hear the man's fast steps behind us. We climbed into the cab just in time, slamming the doors as he pounded furiously on the windows, screaming threats. I hit the accelerator and sped away. The woman was trembling, barely able to speak her thanks. I drove non-stop until we reached a brightly lit gas station a few kilometers away, where we called the police. Later, when authorities arrived, they arrested the man. I learned then that this wasn't his first attack. He was already wanted for crimes in the region. The woman was safe. Though I was still shaken, adrenaline running through me, I felt relieved to have intervened. Not long after, I finally quit my job. I've never driven that road again. As soon as I had the chance, I moved with my family to another city. I didn't want to expose them, or myself, to such danger again. The truth is, terror from the living can strike at any moment, when we least expect it.